You are a cultural pioneer, or as I'd like to say, a culture-neer. You're daring to go where others aren't willing to go. The unknown doesn't scare you, it intrigues you. You're not satisfied with the status quo. Business as usual is not in your DNA. You're done with doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You're an explorer at heart and a trendsetter by nature. You were born with purpose, called to lead, destined to make a difference. You are a Culture-Neer. Welcome to the Culture-Neer podcast, where faith, leadership, and culture collide. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and today's guest has one of the most unbelievable stories you're ever going to hear in the world of business. I mean, he's got the story of ambition, deception, whistleblowing, prison, redemption, ultimately transformation. I mean, this sounds like a story straight out of the Bible. So he was the highest level executive of a Fortune 500 company ever to become a whistleblower. This guy wore a wire for the FBI, I think for a little over 3 years. He ended up serving 8.5 years in prison. And it was there, I think, that his life just radically got changed because he met the God-man Jesus and really discovered his true identity and purpose. Today, fast forward, he serves as the vice president of culture and care at Coca-Cola Consolidated, which, if you don't know, is the world's largest Coca-Cola bottler in the United States. He's the executive director of the T Factor, where he helps shape faith-driven culture side by side with Frank Harrison, who is the CEO of Coke Consolidated, which I have a lot of respect for. If you've not read the book, The T Factor, I encourage you to do that. Their mission statement is to honor God in all they do. And to see how they do that in a Fortune 500 company is nothing short of miraculous and definitely inspiring. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to hear the Mark Whitaker story. I mean, this is the more I researched you after speaking with you, this is a wild, dramatic journey in corporate America. And I really want to kind of land us towards the end into this Coca-Cola Consolidated, because I think our audience needs to figure out how they can merge, the sacred with the secular, their work life with their faith and all that stuff. But before that, can we learn a little bit about you and kind of tell us a little bit of the backstory?
Yeah, well, I grew up outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, and met my wife when she was in 7th grade and I was 8th grade, and went to our high school proms together and was a gifted student, did very well, president of my class. And I had full scholarship for 8 years of college. My parents said they wouldn't be able to pay for my college, especially if I didn't go to a Christian school. I grew up in a Christian parents. And so I went got full scholarship, went to Ohio State University for a bachelor's and master's degree, got a PhD in the Ivy League from biochemistry at Cornell. And I never met one Christian professor in 8 years. I was the only child out of 4 to go to college in my family. Never met one Christian professor in 8 years, but I had plenty of professors, especially in the Ivy League, that said, if you believe in God, you can't be a scientist. I had one in physics that if you believe in God, I want you out of my class. And to have that for 8 years, I started telling all my friends at Cornell. Now, this would have been 40 years ago. Now, I told all my friends at Cornell that my parents were Christians because they didn't go to college and didn't know better. So basically, I was turned away from believing in God and not even consider it through my education, especially through a secular school and especially in an Ivy League. And I think they would be worse today, 40 years later, than they were then. My mom said her biggest concern was, would she recognize me after I finished 8 years of secular college? And she did not. She did not recognize me. And so all I heard at Cornell was, you're going to become CEO, PhD students. The biotech industry was exploding in the early 80s when I graduated in 83. All I heard was, with a PhD from an Ivy League university, you'll be CEO of a large biotech or pharmaceutical company someday. And that's all I thought about. That became my God, really, to become a top executive of a Fortune 500 company. And fast forward 7 years, I graduated age 25, which is about 5 years younger than most PhD students at Cornell. Most of them graduate average age about 32. I was 25. at the time. So I was 7 to 10 years younger than most of the students. And when I graduated the biotech industry, there were 10 jobs for every graduate. So I joined Ralston-Purina right out of college, which is Nestle's now, Fortune 500 company, St. Louis, Missouri. My wife worked at Botanical Gardens in St. Louis, and she worked South African plant researcher at Botanical Gardens. I was down on Checkerboard Square at Ralston-Purina and in their headquarters, and I was 25 years of age. And within a few years, I was 4 years in Europe and became vice president of acquisitions and mergers in Frankfurt, Germany. And within 7 years from the time I graduated from Cornell, I was divisional president and corporate vice president of the 56th largest company in America, known as ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, out of Decatur, Illinois. And we had a 75-year-old CEO, a 71-year-old COO, and I was 32 in 1989. And I was number 4 out of 30. They were $70 billion in revenue, 56th largest company on the Fortune 500 at the time. I think they're number 38 now. They're even larger today. Largest food additive company in the world. And basically, I was number 4 out of 32,000 employees. And the 3 above me were 40 years my senior. So wow. I share young people, I said, show me your mentor, I'll show you your future. And this is a good example of that, what I'm going to be example. And I remember in 1989, when I joined, the CEO gave me my own jet, my own Falcon 50. The 7 top executives got their own jet. With me being ranked number 4, I had my own Falcon 50 for almost 8 years assigned to me, and 2 pilots assigned to me. I bought the CEO's home. He wanted to move to something smaller with him being 75. So he was grooming me and mentoring me to replace him or the COO, which were 40 years my senior. And I bought his home, a 13,000 square foot house with an 8-car garage. He gave me a startup bonus my first month there where I could be a down payment on his home. And it had horse riding stables with an inside arena for my kids, 15 acres, 3 golf greens, swimming pool,
tiny home,
garage, 13,000 square foot. I mean, it was a mansion for sure. And I basically, within my first month there with a jet and a mansion, best way I describe it is I was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber. And the salary was in the 6 figures, but with bonuses in a publicly traded company, most of your income is stock options bonuses. And my income, stock options and bonus, total compensation was almost $3 million a year in 1989 for 8 years. And that was equivalent to about $10 million a year today's time. And that became my God. I became obsessed with that, Terry. I mean, an 8-car garage, I just filled that car with Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedes, had a couple $1 million worth of cars. My bonuses monthly were almost $300,000. So I could buy a Ferrari just with 1 month's bonus. And I did. And I did that. And my wife's driving a 10-year-old Wrangler Jeep. And I'm driving Ferraris. And I told Ginger, I said, my wife's mom got real sick when her mom was 52, was in the hospital 10 months. This was before I joined ADM. And my wife became a Christian. And I remember when she told me when she was a Christian, a few years before I joined ADM, I said, Ginger, I'm a PhD scientist from an Ivy League university. I said, how can you believe in God? You know God don't exist. I said, Ginger, you work for Carl Sagan of Cosmos and astrophysics. Because when I was at Cornell, she worked for Carl Sagan in the astrophysics department. And I said, he didn't believe in God. And he talked how you can't be a scientist and believe in God. And she said, Mark, I'm telling you, I've been sitting beside my mom for 10 months every day in the hospital. And her mom was a miracle that she survived. And my wife, through a nurse born into her, became a Christian. And she said, Mark, I'm telling you, you're wrong. God exists and Jesus is the Son of God. And she said, I'm going to pray for you just like your parents have been praying for you their whole lives.
Oh, you were on the hit list.
Yeah. She was praying for me, but I said, I think it's the most ridiculous thing ever. I've never met an Ivy League scientist that believes in God, and I just can't imagine that. But I said, as long as you're finding productivity, and she's active in the church, active in women's groups, and I just thought it was all craziness. I could not buy into it at all.
Mm.
After 8 years of college, tell me the opposite. Tell me
Yeah.
just the opposite. So yeah,
Well,
so I
that
took line and sinker in the job, kept moving up the corporate ladder. They were grooming me, and even announced in Fortune magazine that they were grooming me to be the next COO, and there was someone 10 years older than me to be the next CEO. But I thought, well, gosh, that guy's going to be 10 years older than me. Someday I'll go from even COO to CEO. So I saw a path to the top. I was already number 4, but I saw a clear path to the top, and they were pouring into me. They were treating me like a son.
so ambitious, young, you're wealthy, you're climbing the ladder. Like at that moment in your life, like what was the belief system? The motivation obviously was probably just to keep climbing the ladder, but looking back, like what were all those blind spots that were driving you during those early years?
Well, Terry, it was an addiction. I would say it'd be no different than someone having a drug addiction or alcohol. I was addicted to that. I mean, it was like crack. It was just not enough. And I even saw the people, the mentors who I work for, also a lot of example of selfish leadership, not servant leadership. And our CEO was a billionaire. He owned about 5% of a $70 billion company. He was the largest single shareholder. And I tell you, that still wasn't enough, not even close to enough, being a
Mm.
billionaire. And I was on that path. I felt like, compared to like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, that we're poverty. We got to keep working hard and keep moving forward. So it was an addiction. I mean, I worked from 6 in the morning till 11 at night. I mean, because a lot of mine was in bonuses and stock options, and I was going to give everything I have to keep moving up that corporate ladder, but step on my own
Mm.
grandma to get ahead at that point.
Wow. Yeah, just like sin, there's just never enough. There's always
Yeah,
something else to chase because it
yeah.
doesn't fill the hole.
So
So,
go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, so we're starting to get into the crazy stuff. So, you're a high ranked executive. How in the world does that move to becoming a whistleblower in the FBI and a movie and all this? It just seems like craziness.
Well, without my wife, the largest price fixing case would have never happened. That came out clear in the 7-week trial when almost 30 people went to prison, just 4 from ADM alone, in the largest price fixing case in history. And basically, after a couple years with the company, when they announced in Fortune magazine they were grooming me to be the next COO, to go from divisional president to company COO and president, and they said it'd be a couple years of mentorship under the current CEO, who was 71, and the CEO was 75. So I was being mentored by them. But then after a couple of years, before they told me that they were going to be the next COO, they said, Mark, we're going to have to share some things with you we haven't shared. And they shared with me about a cartel, an international cartel, fixing the prices of some of the key ingredients of ADM and doing it for almost 12 years. And they
Wow.
shared that with me, and I made a comment because I'm only 2 years with the company at that time, and I said, "Well, that's not legal. That's breaking antitrust laws. That's collusion. That's a." And they said, "Mark, everybody does it. These politicians that put these laws on the books know nothing about business. They put those antitrust laws on the books in the 1800s and know nothing about business. And to be in a commodity business, you have to work with your competitors. You absolutely have to. And this is normal." And I'm thinking, well, here's a CEO that's been there for 35 years. Here I'm 8, 9 years out of college. Well, this is the real world. What you read in textbooks is one thing, but this is the real
Yeah.
world. And I think, who am I going to believe? Someone that's CEO of the 56th largest company on the Fortune 500, or some book that I learned in college? And so he said, "Yeah, to move up, you're going to have to do this. I see someday you'll take this over," because of the age of him and our COO. And basically, I started going to the price fixing meetings in Mexico City and Singapore. We had our own jets, and And these meetings were all around the world. And I started just listening and learning and getting to meet our competitors, basically, because price fixing is getting together with your competitors and fixing the prices. And when you do that, these are products that go into Kellogg's and Kraft and Pillsbury and about any food or beverage product, processed food or beverage product you buy in the grocery store. There's probably something from ADM in it and the ingredient side. And so when someone pays higher for ingredients, they just pass that price to the consumer. So the consumers pay that. And it was hundreds of millions of dollars extra. And we were getting millions of dollars of bonuses from that. And I just thought, well, I rationalized just like our CEO did. Everybody does it. They've been doing it for 12 years. It's just a normal course of business until I shared it with my wife 7 months later. I shared it with my wife, a Christian at that point, for a few years already at that point. And I'll never forget, she said, well, Mark, she said, asked, is that legal? And I said, well, it's not legal, but everybody does it. I'm sharing it with someone who I met in junior high. We were in 7th and 8th grade. I said, everybody does it, Ginger. It's the way business is done. And she said, well, who pays it? And I said, well, basically the consumers. They pay the Kellogg's and Kraft and Pillsbury and all these food. I'm just naming 3 or 4, but all these food, Heinz and all these food additive companies, they pay the added price. And then they pass that to the consumer because they have their profit margin built in. And she said, you mean my grandma on $800 a month Social Security? And that's her biggest expense is her food bill? Because $800 is about the level of Social Security back, this is early 90s now. I'm a couple of years, joined ADM in 89. I was a couple of years with them by that point, by the time I was involved in the price fixing, because they waited till I was part of the family, till they had complete trust in me to bring me into that cartel. And she said, Mark, I don't know if I can live with that. I'm going to have to pray about it. When she told me she was going to pray about it, I knew I was in trouble. And when she did that, and literally that day that I told her, which was November 5th, 1992, probably the biggest argument. We've been married 46 years. There's never been a bigger argument than that day. But she, after praying about it, she said, Mark, this is a massive fraud. Your company's earning almost $1 billion a year, $70 billion in revenue, $4 billion in pre-tax profit, $1 billion coming from the fraud, the price fixing. She said, stealing from your own consumers and the food processing companies. She said, Mark, I can't live with it. You're turning yourself in today or I'm doing it for you. But it's going to happen today. And she knew we knew the FBI because I talked to her a lot about the FBI. The FBI was always in our organization, even the 2 years I was there, helping with smaller cases. Decatur, Illinois is about 80,000 people live in Decatur, and 30,000 work at ADM. So it's by far the largest company, about 3 hours south of Chicago in central Illinois. So FBI was helping us on a Chicago Board of Trade case. I mean, several cases because we were the biggest company in town. But they were helping on these little cases, but this big case was right under their noses. So it was kind of like they built a relationship with them. They keep them away from what was really going on.
Wow. So walk us through that moment. She challenges you. Something's going to happen. What happened next?
Well, then I said, Ginger, one can go to prison for breaking antitrust laws. It's a federal offense. So I said, I'd go to prison. She said, if you go to prison, I'll stay with you. But she said, you got to do the right thing. And I said, Ginger, our CEO is a billionaire. I said, we live in his home. We bought his home. This is a billionaire. He would have been kind of like an Elon Musk back then and some of these other, well-known billionaire CEO back in the 80s and the early 90s. I said, he's best friends with President Clinton, who was president at the time. They're on the phone a couple times a month. I said, he went to President Nixon's funeral on President Clinton's plane. I said, he will destroy us, Ginger. She said, I prayed about that. God will protect us, but we got to do it, and we got to do it today. And we argued for a couple hours, and there was just no way talking her out of it. No way. So that very day, the FBI that we both knew that's been helping ADM we're actually sharing with them about a bigger case right under their noses that very day.
Wow.
And so we shared for
Wow.
about 4 hours, and I remember I kept trying to divert the attention on other things, and I said, "Yeah, you got all these drug cases in Decatur, and I don't feel safe here." And they said, "Well, that's local law enforcement." And I kept trying to divert the attention, and then Ginger would say, "Well, it's a fraud." He said, "What kind of fraud?" And I said, "What about all these drug cases in Decatur?" I said, "I don't feel safer." I did that say like 6 times. He said, "How long's that been going on?" I said, "Well, what about not feeling safe here in Decatur?" And he said, my wife said, "It's been going on 12 years." So he got out of the truth out of Ginger pretty quickly. And we ended up having about a 4-hour meeting. Lots of notes were taken. And I had a choice to be arrested that day, November 5th, 1992, or wear a wire to go. I'm only 7 months engaged with the case, and go wear a wire to go after the ones that started at 12 years earlier. That was my choice. That was the line in the sand.
So I wonder, I'm sure there's a lot in between here, but you would think outside looking in, you're working with the FBI. How in the world do you end up spending time? You would think that would be a trade-off.
I mean, the FBI did everything they could. I kept getting in my own way. Just the greed addiction I had just kept getting in my own way. But they did everything they could to help me. I'm still friends with them today. We went on vacation with one a couple years ago with their family to Orange Beach, and I'm still friends with all of them. They've been very supportive. They did a documentary on Discovery Channel several years ago just to support me. All 3 of the FBI agents did.
Wow. Wow. Well, let's fast forward just a little bit because I know we have a limited amount of time and you've got story after story. We may have to do a part 2 at some point, but in prison though. So let's fast forward. You go through all this. Now you're having to, it's costing you something. And, but something radically happened.
Yeah, basically,
what happened?
basically is this. They gave me, for all my cooperation, a plea agreement for 6 months in prison because there were some things like under the table bonus system, and I didn't pay tax on it, and it was tax fraud and things that came up that the company, when they saw a witness against me, when I saw that I was a witness against them, I mean, they came after me with everything they have, and so they said, "Look, with all your cooperation, any of these things you did wrong, we're going to give you a 6-month sentence just for wearing a wire." I wear a wire 10 hours a day for 3 years. Every Monday through
Wow.
Friday, they wired me up at 6 every morning for 3 years. Then I'd meet with them at midnight a couple nights a week, going over the tapes and turning over the tapes and getting new batteries into 3 different recorders, one attached to my shaved. They attached microphones to my chest. It was wrapped around my body with an athletic band every day. Then another one in a briefcase and another one in a tape recorder. As your listeners would see on the Discovery Channel documentary on my website, markwhitaker.com, that was kind of what the FBI did to combat the movie. They felt the movie really missed the facts of the case. So they did a documentary 2 months after the movie to combat it, the 3 real agents. And in that documentary, they're telling me a couple times a week, as they said, "Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you." And I heard that a couple times a week for 3 years. They said, "This is billions of dollars at stake. People are going to go to prison. Billionaires are going to go to prison." So they said, "This is some serious," and that took a tremendous toll on me. Actually, on the documentary, they had neighbors taping me, videoing me, blowing the driveway off with a gas leaf blower at 3 a.m. during thunderstorms with a suit and tie on. I mean, I was falling apart. I've done 7 events for the FBI, including Quantico FBI Academy, and they don't allow anyone to wear a wire longer than a year because they saw what happens when someone wears one for 3. The pressure and just loss of your identity. So they gave me a 6-month sentence, and my wife and I are in front of our lawyer, who's a judge now in Chicago, and said, "Mark, 6 months, deal of a lifetime. The things you didn't tell them, sure, they're small compared to price fixing, but you didn't tell them everything. You benefited from the case. So 6 months, Mark, deal of a lifetime." I looked at Ginger and said, "I don't know if I can do 6 months. So that's a Martha Stewart sentence. No razor wire, white collar camp." And I looked at Ginger and I said, "Ginger, it's all your fault. I've had to wear a
Oh,
wire for 3 years because of you. Now I got to go to prison for 6 months. By the time I wore a wire 3 years, now I'm 38. I said, I'm going to go to prison at age 38 and I'll be a felon the rest of my life. And I said, Ginger, it's all your fault. And I ripped up the plea agreement, threw it in a trash can, fired the lawyer, hired a group of lawyers the next day, several lawyers,
mm,
and fought the case for 3 years in the courts and got 8 years instead when I would have had
wow.
6 months. And I was so depressed, Terry, that I wrote a 17-page letter to my family, pulled my car in a garage and tried to take my own life. I was into myself. I thought I had a 6-month sentence, go in at 38, get out at 38. Now I'm going in at 40 and getting out at 48. I said, I can't survive this and tried to take my own life. I was hospitalized for a month, treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, treated for clinical depression, some of the things that happen when you wear a wire for 3 years. I mean, I was hopeless and helpless. And then someone read about me in the newspaper from CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection. And he reached out to me. He was in the pharmaceutical industry. And he said, Mark, he said, I've been reading about you. He said, I think this is really going to be the beginning of your life, not the end. And I want to start
Oh,
meeting with you. And he started discipling me. And his name was Ian Howes, and started giving me a lot of hope. He was using a study called Operation Timothy, 7 months before I had to go to prison. And he started giving me a lot of hope. But I had 8 years of college telling me it's not true, especially
mm,
in the Ivy League, that told me if you can't be a scientist, if you believe in God. But it gave me hope, but I still had that education block. And then my second week in prison, a guy named Chuck Colson showed up. And Chuck Colson was the White House counsel under President Nixon, went to prison in the 70s for the Watergate scandal, became a Christian right before he went to prison, changed his life, started the biggest prison ministry in the world. 20 years later, from the mid 70s in 1998, he's sitting with me in a federal prison. And he said, Mark, this is going to be the beginning of your life. And told me about God. He said, did he talk much about God at Cornell? And I said, oh, yeah, that God doesn't exist. And he said, well, he went to Brown, another Ivy League school, and they told him the same thing. He said, Mark, they're wrong. The Ivy League is hiding that. These secular universities are hiding that. He said, do you think there's a PhD scientist that believes in God? And I said, no. I don't believe there is one in the world. He pulled out an article by Albert Einstein that Albert Einstein wrote that only God could create man and only God could create the universe, and the Big Bang Theory was impossible. And I said, well,
oh,
he's a pretty smart guy. They never told me that at Cornell. I said, is he a Christian? He said, well, he's an Orthodox Jew. He believes in God, but he's not a follower of Jesus. But he said, I'm going to leave you this other book. And it was by Sir Isaac Newton. Uh, and he wrote as much about Jesus as he did about science. And I read that book, and he came with me the next time, and he gave me some articles by Francis Collins, who discovered the human genome, a Christian, believed in God and follower of Jesus. And it was article after article and book after book. He knew exactly, God put the right man in the right seat and knew exactly who to send my direction. And he became like a father to me. Chuck Olson did, mentored me, discipled me. I became a Christian that first year. I remember one book, he said, Mark, here's an atheist biologist that trying to prove that God didn't exist. And he gave me the book. And I thought it was going to be an atheist. And it was an atheist at one time, but he studied it for 10 years and he wrote a book called Surprised by Faith by Dr. Don Byerly, Bierle. And Don Byerly went from an atheist to a Christian the more he studied the sciences. And I finished that book. That was the last straw on the camel's back. And I said, how can you be a scientist and not believe in God after the
oh,
200 pages of evidence that I just read in Surprised by Faith by Don Byerly? And I remember at 2 a.m, I went from a 13,000 square foot house, corporate jet, $3 million a year to $20 a month in a 10 by 10 concrete floor, a locker, and a roommate. And I remember 2 a.m. on June 4th, 1998, the month after I turned 41, I got on my knees and gave my life to Jesus and said, God, I've been wrong. My parents have been right. Ginger's been right. And I've been wrong. I've been blinded. I've been blinded by the university system. And my wife came that following weekend with our 3 kids. I said, Ginger, I've been blaming you for 6 years, 3 years wearing a wire, and then 3 years in the courts. I've got no one to blame but myself. And I was in tears. And meeting with her and my kids, and our marriage started reconciling. She moved next to the prison and lived next to the prison the entire time I was in prison, and came every Friday night and all day Saturday and all day Sunday. I was on a Navy base in Pensacola, Florida, and the chapel at the Navy base even became our family's church at the Navy
Wow.
base. And our family
Wow.
started reconciling. Our marriage started getting strong. My relationship with our 3 children became strong. And I started helping guys get their GEDs, and some of them get 2-year college degrees. Spanish guys read better English and speak better English. I will say at $20 a month, probably became the most productive years of my life, because it's the first time I ever helped anybody else besides myself. So I
Ooh.
learned servant leader really was in federal prison.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So
Well-
yeah, I've changed there. It changed dramatically. And I've been out almost 20 years. And once I made that commitment in 1998, heading 3 decades ago now, I made that commitment that God, I'm going to give everything I have for the rest of my life.
So what has that looked like when you stepped out of that prison cell?
Well, I
And
tell you what,
made-
I did. I learned HVAC, and I learned it well, because I thought, who's going to hire someone even with an Ivy League PhD, convicted felon? So I learned HVAC, learned it for about 8 years, and I thought I could make a living, eventually start my own company and be successful. I mean, I was divisional president of one of the biggest companies in the world for almost 8 years, and I was vice president for another 6 years of another large company prior to that. So I had, almost 2 decades experience. So I said, I can build a really good HVAC business and support my family. But some biotech companies were reading about me. Then it was real new. Like Chuck Colson read about me in the Washington Post. There was not online. It was real newspapers back then.
Yeah.
When he read about me, and that's when he reached out to me after he read about me. And then other company CEOs read about me, and they started visiting me in prison and to review their patents and to review their strategic plans. And basically they said, look, we can't pay you, but we can offer maybe an opportunity for you when you get out. So I was helping these companies, and many of them, and 4 different ones. And they offered me a job the day I got out. I joined a company the day after I got out, biotech cancer research company, but a Christian CEO. I didn't want to fall back in that trap of greed. That's 20 years ago, by the way, when I got out. I was in my 40s then. And I joined that biotech company. He said, look, we got to start you like right out of college. I'm starting from scratch all over again. Like I just finished a PhD in college, but my mind was active because I was doing all that work for him every week. And after 4 promotions, I became the COO of that company, that cancer research company, the number 2 executive. And I was COO for almost 10 years. And I'm still on the advisory board today. And it's a faith-based company. I spent a lot of my time integrating faith. And then I became COO of CBMC, the group that reached out to me right before Chuck Colson, Christian Businessmen Connection, equipping business leaders to integrate faith and transform their cultures. And I got to know Co-Consolidated well through that. And I've been vice president of culture and care for almost over 7 years now at Coca-Cola Consolidated, probably the largest publicly traded, faith-friendly, purpose-driven company. And as you said, Terry, in the introduction, our purpose statement is to honor God in all we do by serving others, pursuing excellence, and growing profitably. Who on the NASDAQ has a purpose statement to honor God in all we do by serving others? And I'm over the culture care, which is the faith integration. It's such a great season. I do want to add a footnote to this. Those companies that were the victims in that case, ADM paid a $100 million fine to the government. They paid hundreds of millions back to the clients on class action suits. And the largest one was paid for corn sweetener price fixing, $400 million to the Coca-Cola system. I basically vice president of and an officer of the company that was my biggest victim 30 years ago.
Wow.
The miracle of God. And those companies gave my wife a whistleblower reward, including the Coke system, Tyson Foods, Procter & Gamble, Kraft, Pillsbury, They put a whistleblower system because they were so appreciative of her. They financed my family with a whistleblower reward to my wife for her starting the case. They financed my family the whole time I was in prison.
Wow.
The very victims in the case. And now I work for the largest victim.
Well, only God. What an incredible story.
Only God. Miracle of God. Only God.
For sure. So in the remaining little bit of time we have, can you walk us through? I mean, we just talked about the mission statement, of Coke Consolidated, but what does that look like in your role at Coke Consolidated every day? If people are not aware, I think they're going to be blown away of what can happen in a public traded company and how God can use that mission field just to change course lives.
Yeah, it's almost like a church plant. We're just shy of we're 17,600 employees, 104 plant sites, largest bottler in America, publicly traded under the ticker Coke, COKE, on the NASDAQ. We're not Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta. That's a different company. They're not I wouldn't call them a faith-friendly, purpose-driven company. But we are a faith with a purpose statement, like you said, honor God in all we do by serving others. It's right behind me there on the wall. And that's in the lobby of our headquarters here in Charlotte. That's in our plant sites in the lobby when you walk in. We have a good example of what Culture and Care Department does. It's our Frank Harrison, our chairman and CEO's vision starting 24 years ago. We're a 122-year-old company. We've been a faith-friendly, faith-based company for the last 24 years. Chaplain in every plant site. I mean, the amount of suicides prevented, marriages saved, the number of recommits and salvations we have on a monthly basis, more than most churches. I mean, it's amazing, the ministry. And these chaplains are it's basically a chaplain for every 200 employees we have. For over 17,000 employees for every 200 employees. I mean, it's millions of dollars, you can imagine. It's a chaplain for every 200 employees. And these chaplains, with 200 employees, they can each day say, hello, Mike, how were you? How was your wife's surgery last week? How was your son's graduation? And then, by the way, if there's anything you need, anything going on in your life, I'm available for a private meeting. When they do that every day, there's 4 or 5 employees at each plant site saying, yeah, I'd like to meet with you privately and share. And that's where the gospel gets shared. And that's where the recommits and salvations happen. We have 134 prayer groups company-wide, 16 that I get to lead myself. I'm leading 16 myself. And that's a mentorship opportunity itself. And like I told you at the beginning, your listeners, for show me your mentor, show your future. Look at my mentor, show me how to do price fixing. We all went to prison. Then Chuck Colson became my mentor, how my life changed. Show me your mentor, I show your future. So these prayer groups gives us lots of mentoring opportunities that pour into these young believers and emerging leaders and ones that don't even know God yet and plant seeds. And I mean, it's a ministry within the beverage business. We have a weekly devotional that's audio called Refill. It's every Monday morning. We prepare and write the devotionals in Culture and Care Department. We have different employees from all the different departments and all different levels, from CEO down to forklift driver, different levels that present those, that do those recordings, because we want our truck drivers to hear them. We want our deskless employees to hear them, our remote employees. So it's an audio devotional, and they're hearing their peers share it. Another way of seed planting. We have a monthly chapel service. We just had it yesterday called The Gathering, Faith, Fellowship, and Food. They're coming for a free lunch. I mean, the room, it's filled up every time, our auditorium. It's filled up. And they come for a free lunch too, but they hear a biblical message. I mean, what a great way to pour in your employees. And then they go pour into others. We have a year-long discipleship program called Radical Mentoring. We've been doing that for 12 years. Chaplains for 24, discipleship for 12 years. And it's 2 mature believers with 8 young believers, new recommits and salvations and young believers. And it's a year-long. You meet with them monthly, and it's scripture memorization. It's how to read the Bible, how to build your quiet time, how to be the spouse that God designed you to be. There's groups of 8 in the women groups, and there's a group of 8 in the men's groups. I've just finished a group in South Bend here just last weekend, and it's monthly, meet monthly for 3 hours for a month. But then two of the months are noon Friday to noon Sunday retreats where they share their
Wow.
testimonies and they share the purpose of their life, and it prepares them when this discipleship program's over with to have their own, to basically grow in their own faith. And they start pouring into others and planting seeds with others where they know how to share their testimony. They know how to plant seeds to non-believers. They know how to help believers grow in their faith. I mean, it's the discipleship program that puts them 10 or 15 years in advance of where they would be without this program.
Wow. So how in the world did all those things come about?
Well, it's Frank
I mean,
vision. God put a vision, Frank Harrison, our chairman, CEO, 24 years ago. And God told him that, Frank, you may be CEO of this company and chairman of, but God owns it all. Psalm 24:1, God owns it all. And that's when he started giving it to God and started using this company as a ministry opportunity too. And the amazing thing is, the more that, as he says, his favorite quote is, generosity drives cash flow. The more we give of time, treasure, and talent, the more God blesses the business. The company don't do less because we're doing too much ministry. No, the company does better than our competition because we're doing it God's way, not our way. I mean, it's such an example of servant leadership.
Yeah, and what a message if you're listening today, your time, talent, and treasure. I was just having a conversation with an individual earlier this morning, young business owner, and I was telling him what, was difficult for me to learn. I said, it's one thing for us to mentally assent, well, this business is God's, I'm going to give back through this, which, time, talent, and treasure. I think in some ways you can come to that point, believe it in your mind, and maybe that's a little bit easier, but to get that from your head to your heart to where you literally wake up every day and realize, you know what, none of this is mine. So none of these decisions are solely mine. Yeah. And I have to not ask God to bless what I'm about to do. I have to get direction for his company and what he wants to do and know that's blessed. And getting into that rhythm earlier on can save so much headache. And man, how God can use that to impact the lives of not just your business, but your people. Much like the church is the called out ones. It's not a building, it's the people. Well, your business is not just a legal entity. It's the people that work for that business that God is so invested in because of his son, and wants us to pay close attention on how we manage that business because of the impact it has on, vendors and employees and customers and all the people that we come in contact with. So a lot of our listeners are probably thinking that all sounds great. I can see how that maybe could work at a big company, but how can small businesses build a culture that honors God just as intentionally? Any advice there?
Yeah, we have what's called T-Factor, which is part of our culture and care department. That's transformation factor. And our chairman CEO even wrote a book titled Transformation Factor, which is about this. And we have events. We have 4 in-person events a year where we help companies that aren't ours. I mean, external companies.
Yeah.
And we help them be more bold and integrate their faith at work. And we've had Toyota at a T-Factor event, and they just had their first chaplain hired a month ago in Huntsville, Alabama. And if it goes well, they're going to put a chaplain in every plant in the world because they see our retention rates, they see our employee engagement, and they want to duplicate some of the culture that we have at Coca-Cola. And they have 300,000 employees compared to our 17,000. And then we've had small companies, probably more small than large. Some of them 30 employees, 10 employees. And we've seen them start prayer groups. They start Bible studies. They start a weekly devotion. All these things are easy to do, and there's almost no cost to do that. And then we see them, like a chaplain. They hire someone, like we use Corporate Chaplain America, and we need them full time, but they hire Corporate Chaplain America where it's like 4 hours. If they have 10 employees, 8 a.m. to noon on a Wednesday or 8 a.m. to noon on a Friday works. And they find kind of a fractional basis. And it's only a few $100s to have a chaplain for 4 hours once a week. And that's enough for 10 employees to cover and shepherd
Yeah.
your employee. So no matter what your size, we've seen employees implement all of these things that we have. No matter if they have 10 employees or 300,000, it doesn't matter the size.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're listening today, that Transformation Factor is probably the most impactful business book that I have ever read. And I encourage you, if what you're listening to today is piquing your interest, you're trying to figure out, how do I make a difference? How do I move from success to significance? How do I really, build a legacy where I can impact other people? All that stuff is rushing through your mind as we're talking to you. You need to pick up that book. Yeah. It will rock your world, on how God's purpose can come alive in your business. And yes, it affects, just like culture, it affects everything in your business. Yes. From retention to the customer experience to recruiting, all that stuff, it will have an impact on. So,
and we also have T-Factor events. I mentioned 4 in-person events each year, but we also have an on-demand digital format that's 24/7. People can watch at any time. They can go to t-factor.com, and they can register on that website, or they can contact me at my email address, mark.whitaker@cokeconsolidated.com. And t-factor.com has my information there also on that website. And it's on demand. They can watch it 24/7. It's in 4 languages. We have over 1,000 senior leaders, Christian senior leaders a month, watching the on-demand format. And we've had 80 countries watch the on-demand format and we share that whole story in a 4-hour event. But, it's a 4-hour in-person event, but on demand, they can watch 30 minutes at a time over a couple of weeks. They don't have, they can do it at their convenience.
Yeah. And I've been doing just that. And we're going to take all my key leaders through that then as a group. And I highly encourage you to do that, guys. I mean, the impact that can be made Monday through Saturday can be seen as a celebration on Sundays. I think our whole strategy of Sunday being the day for us as believers, looking to have the biggest impact, we've looked at it a little bit backwards. That Sunday is preparing us to go out Monday through Saturday, where all these people are going to work that don't know Jesus, and for us to go out and be the church. And then I think the fruit of that is those full churches on Sunday. And it will challenge how you look at what you get up and do every day. So I really do encourage you to hop online, take advantage of that, buy the book. What advice would you give leaders, Mark, who are tempted, maybe like you were at one time, by success, ambition, and compromise? How to keep that balanced?
Well, I would just keep reminding themselves that God owns it all, as we talked about Psalm 24:1, and also Colossians 3:23. Whatever we do it with all our heart, like we're working for Jesus, working for the Lord, and not for man. And I think just reminding ourselves and praying for a full hedge of protection to keep us away from thoughts where money does become an idol, or greed, or materialism, or power, and to keep praying for that hedge of protection, and just keep reminding ourselves our bank accounts, our cars, our homes, our families, they're God's, and we're just stewards of all these things. Short time we're here on earth. My dad died at 90, my mom at 91, but that's still a short time compared to eternity. And just do it. My mom was more proud of me. She just died a year ago. She was more proud of me going 8 years of prison and 8 years of college. She thought college took me away from believing in God, and the brokenness of prison brought me to God. And, just reminding ourselves that this is all God's. This is not ours. And any blessings we get, to thank Him for those blessings. But we're not taking any of this with us. What we take with what the opportunities we have is like Chuck Colson, who died 13 years ago, poured himself into me and many others like me, and the impact where he's still living on, even though he's in heaven. What others learned from him, his mentees are now mentors and pouring into others. That's the legacy we have, is leaving the world a better place when we leave it than when we came.
So good. I want to rapid fire just a couple of quick questions at you as we land this plane. What do you say to the believer who wants their workplace to be a mission field, but they don't even know how to start?
Well, I would say a place, and we talk about that at T Factor. I recommend they go to T Factor because we talk about that about where, t-factor.com. Good place to start is prayer and let God lead.
Hmm.
Maybe have a prayer group with one of your other leaders or two or three of your other leaders to start praying together about how God can use your company for his purpose and not just about you. And so, I mean, prayer is such a good place to start. We see many of them start with chaplains because then a chaplain's usually going to have a prayer group with you too. And
Yeah.
like I said, if
Yeah.
you're small, maybe you got a chaplain 4 hours of work a week. You don't have to have 10 employees and have a full-time chaplain. It can be fractionalized through Corporate Chaplains of America. They're good at that. They work with a lot of smaller companies that need fractions, but you can never go wrong with starting with prayer. Never.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. What about the biggest misconception about faith in the workplace? How would you answer that?
Biggest misconception is, and the biggest lie that Satan's been successful with, kind of like our CEO 24 years ago, he was told, if you pray, lock your door, don't let anybody see it. Don't bring a
Mm.
chaplain in the company. If you keep your faith and your company separate, Satan wants that. Satan wants you
Yeah.
to think that. And here we're a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ with a weekly devotional, a monthly chapel service, a chaplain in every plant for every 200 employees, 134 prayer groups, a year-long discipleship program, and all these different initiatives. And we're a publicly traded company. And in 24 years, we've not had one lawsuit. We've not even had one HR complaint in 24
Mm.
years.
It's
Because you
awesome.
keep it optional. You can't require someone to join
Sure.
a group, but as long as you keep it optional and just make it accessible, that's all. And our lawyers share at T Factor. We have 2 lawyers share,
Yeah.
and they share that the key is keep it optional. Don't make it required.
What's one leadership habit you practice every day?
For me, my quiet time is the most important thing. Chuck Colson helped me build my quiet time 3 decades ago. I get up at 4 in the morning, and my quiet time is the most important time. And in the Bible, for me personally, I like reading the Bible every year all the way through. And I'm about 18 years doing that. And I'm finishing again for this year here next month. And I use a Bible plan, a little bit of Old Testament, a little bit of New Testament, and then Psalms, kind of a Bible reading plan. And by the end of the year, and people think, well, gosh, aren't you just reading the same thing all over again? God emphasizes something different
Yeah.
every time I read, something I've read the year before. So no,
Mm.
it's different. God emphasized, like right now I'm in the book of Nehemiah, and so much we learned so much. Nehemiah prayed for 100 days to build that wall around Jerusalem, and he built it in 52 days. And I'm talking about a wall that was 40 feet high, 2.5 miles long, and 8 feet wide, and all stone. And they had no cranes back then, and they had opposition, people trying to kill them as they were building the wall. So they had one person building, another person protecting that person. And he did it in 52 days. Miraculous. And it's because
Yeah.
the prayer was the heavy lifting. He prayed for 3 months and built the wall in less than 2 months.
Yeah. Well,
So there's something
there's
to learn. There's something
yeah.
to learn in every book of that Bible.
Yeah. There's a principle there. And finally, this will be the last question, the big one. How does Mark Whitaker want to be remembered when his time here on earth is over?
I want to remember, compared to my 30s when I wanted to be CEO of a Fortune 50 company, and someday to be a billionaire like my CEO was, who I worked for, and have the mansion which I had, and all those things. And that would have been my 30s. But boy, now I see that a life of significance, the last 30 years is so much more important than a life of success, the way the world defines success. Matter of fact, my wife says murder was on the table when I didn't sign that 6-month agreement, but now she thanks God I didn't sign it. She said I wouldn't even listen to Chuck Colson with a 6-month sentence and would have came out the same greedy man as I went in. She said I had to be
Mm.
broke, and God gave me exactly what I needed. I think I didn't need 8 years. I think 2 would have been enough. But I do think brokenness was important at that stage in my life. But I want to
Yeah.
be remembered by the others that I'm mentoring, discipling, pouring into, like Chuck Colson. He's living on. because it's like Paul and Timothy. Paul poured into Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2. That was a disciple. And when Paul was persecuted, Timothy then was discipling. And Timothy was discipling others, and they started discipling. I think there's nothing more important than building spiritual reproducers and discipling others. I think the purpose of our lives are Matthew 28:19 and 2 Timothy 2:2. Plant seeds to the ones that don't know God, and then pour into ones that know God and help them grow in their faith. Evangelism and discipleship. And I believe that's the purpose of our life every day. And that's what I will be remembered by.
Well said, my friend. Mark, thanks for sharing your story with us. Golly, what a powerful reminder of how God can use what he redeems. Guys, remember, culture, it's only as healthy as the leader. We'll see you next time on the Culture-Neer podcast.
Thank you for joining us on Culture-Neer, where every episode is a step forward on your leadership journey. We hope today's conversation sparked new insights and added real value to your life, empowering you to lead with greater strength and purpose. If you enjoyed what you heard, please connect with us. Follow our Facebook and Instagram pages, subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content, and give us a rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your support helps us grow our community and continue delivering conversations that matter. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep striving, keep leading, and keep inspiring.